Fatima Luna, Howard Myers, Jeff Hildebrand, Julie Robinson, Chris Lafleur, Lee Comrie, Mark Novak, Mead Meyer, Melanie Alvarez, Michael Cantanzaro, Natalie Shep, Paula Bloomer, Roxanne Lindsley, Sandra Maina, and Tiki Lawson. And has anyone joined since I read that list? Okay. Welcome this morning. We have a really wonderful group of presenters this morning on sustainability action plans, and look forward to getting an update on all these activities. Melanie, would you like to provide information about the in-kind form?
Good morning. So we collect in-kind for participation in this meeting. For those of you who are joining us on Zoom, we automatically count your time in this meeting. However, if you spent additional time preparing for this meeting or putting together presentations, please send an email to Lee Comrie with those hours so we can make sure that they're recorded. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. We have sent out with the meeting invitation the meeting summary from our last meeting in April 2nd, 2021. And I would like to hear if there are any comments or modifications that are recommended for the meeting summary. And I am not hearing any. And
this is Chris McBee. I would move to approve.
Thank you, Chris. Is there a second?
This is Mark Novak. I'll second.
Thank you, Mark. If you can unmute yourselves, and we'll just do a voice vote. All those those people who are on the committee to unmute yourself, and those of you who can vote aye, say aye.
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 Are there any nays? The meeting summary is approved. Thank you very much. Our first presenter this morning is Dustin Fitzpatrick, who's the Air Quality Coordinator for Pima Association of Governments, and he will be presenting the Regional Greenhouse Gas Inventory. Dustin, take it away.
Great, thanks for the introduction, Marie. As Marie said, I'll be presenting a summary of the updated Regional Greenhouse Gas Emission Inventory. This is agenda item number 4, and you'll be asked to recommend approval of the inventory report following the presentation. So the updated inventory covers years 2014 to 2019. I previously presented at EPAC a review of the last inventory that covered the years 2012 to 2017. So this inventory added new data for calendar years 2018 and 2019 from the various entities that consume or provide energy resources, including the county and city utilities, airports, rail, landfills, cement, wastewater, and transit providers. The inventory report was provided for review at EPAC and AQS committee members last month, and PAG did not receive any comments for edits or revisions. So there were some minor changes from the previous inventory report that I'll go over. Most of the units are reported to us in US tons and then converted to metric tons for the inventory. Some of the units from past years had not been fully converted over to US tons, and those changes were made for this inventory. Some values were previously reported only for the CO2 and were updated to include CO2e. The public lighting label was changed to street and traffic lights, and facilities was changed to facilities and parks, just to clarify that the parks lighting was not included in public lighting. There were a few data points from the past inventory which were incorrect and were corrected this go around by the regional data contacts. And last, the million British thermal units energy values were removed from the report to focus only on greenhouse gas emissions, which is more consistent with other greenhouse gas inventories that are conducted nationally. So the inventory area for the report is Eastern Pima County, as this is where a majority of the population and greenhouse gas emissions are concentrated. The border was expanded from the previous inventory to reflect the emissions data provided by the utility companies and the Tohono O'odham Nation. So the blue boundary is the overall inventory covering all emissions from the Eastern Pima County community. And then the orange boundary inset there is the area for the city of Tucson community emissions. Then the report includes two other subsets of emissions for the Pima County and city of Tucson government operations. I've previously gone over the methods that are used to calculate greenhouse gas emissions for the inventory. PAG has a membership with ICLEI, which provides us access to their ClearPath emissions calculator. We also use the MOVES motor vehicle emission simulator model for vehicle transportation emissions. For this inventory, we used version 2014 B of MOVES while we transition to the latest version of MOVES model for the next inventory update, which is MOVES 3 that the EPA released earlier this year. So here are the emission sources that are included in the inventory are stationary energy, transportation, waste, industrial processes, and a category for other, which is CAP delivery. Not included in the report are HFCs, PFCs, SF6, fugitive emissions from natural gas distribution, such as those from compressor stations and metering and pressure regulating stations, as well as agricultural emissions. So the carbon dioxide equivalents are derived from the global warming potentials of methane and nitrous oxide. That GWP is a relative measure of the radiative forcing. The definition is following a pulsive emission of 1 kilogram of a given well-mixed greenhouse gas in the present day atmosphere, integrated over a chosen time horizon relative to that of 1 kilogram of carbon dioxide. So for this report, the time horizon is 100 years. As noted at the bottom there, we use the IPCC fourth assessment reporting values. And if you look at some of those excluded greenhouse gases, with methane, it's got 25 times radiative forcing, nitrous oxide, 298. These are over 100-year timeframes. Some of those other ones that are used as refrigerants and in other industries have really high global warming potential values and are pretty critical to regulate, but we didn't track for this inventory. So you can see there, the sulfur hexafluoride, 22,800 times more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. So here are the 2019 greenhouse gas emissions for Eastern Pima County at nearly 13 million metric tons, while the US total for 2019 was 6.5 billion metric tons. So we accounted for 0.2% of the US emissions. 2019 per capita emissions in Eastern Pima County were around 12.5 metric tons per person compared to the US average of about 20. Keep in mind though, with this difference in per capita, that we don't account for our per capita portion of of national energy use, such as for goods manufacturing, military operations, interstate travel, and fossil fuel extraction and refining. So Eastern Pima County population in 2019 was 0.3% of the US total. And the graph on the right there shows the reduction we've had over the past 6 years of total greenhouse gas emissions from 15 to 13 million metric tons. And then the matching corresponding per capita reduction from 15 to 13 metric tons per person. So those numbers, the overall and per capita, are similar because of our population being right near 1 million. So this is the overall emissions from the various source categories for the Eastern Pima County community. As you can see there, stationary energy is a little over half, transportation, a little over a third, industrial processes, which is the cement production, 7%, CAP, 3%, and then waste making up 1% of the emissions. So stationary energy is broken down into different sectors: residential 45%, industrial at 31%, and commercial at 24%. So here's the transportation breakdown. You can see the private and commercial vehicle travel is the majority at 71%, followed by the aircraft at 15%, non-road at 12%, locomotives contributing 2%, and transit less than 1% overall emissions. There's the waste with 97% emissions coming from solid waste, and the other 3% being wastewater reclamation. Here's the city of Tucson community. Overall emissions from the different source categories. It's similar to Eastern Pima County, with the exception that doesn't include the industrial process category for cement, since the Cal Portland facility is not located within the city of Tucson limits. So note, CAP is the same, stationary goes up a little higher, and transportation shifts down to slightly less than a third, and waste stays at 1%. Stationary energy breakdown for city of Tucson community. Residential energy sector comes out the same at 45%, but the industrial and commercial numbers become inverted at 21% and 31% respectively, which makes sense because there are more commercial businesses located in the city and more industrial operations in the county. This is the transportation breakdown for city of Tucson community. There's a higher percentage there from private and commercial vehicle travel than the county community. This is because aircraft and locomotives aren't included in the city of Tucson community, just due to the complexity of separating out the airspace and rail tracks by jurisdiction. And then the waste for the city of Tucson community, you can see the wastewater reclamation goes up slightly to 7% from the county's 3%. And this might be due to the higher proportion of septic systems in the county, where the waste doesn't get reclaimed at a treatment plant. Moving on to the Pima County government emissions here, you can see stationary energy is the majority, nearly 3/4, followed by employee commuting, fleet operations, and then their waste production. So this is just from the government operations portion. So you've got the stationary energy, the facilities and parks taking up a majority of it, wastewater reclamation taking up a third of the needs, and street and traffic lighting pretty low at 2%. This is the fleet for government operations. The majority of it's the on-road vehicles, with only 3% coming from the non-road, the construction type equipment. And the waste contributions majority from wastewater processing versus solid waste disposal. And City of Tucson government overall emissions from the various source categories. Note that stationary energy is so high here compared to the county government because the CAP emissions are attributed to the Tucson water contribution. We've got employee commuting down to 1%, fleet at 2%, and waste less than 1%. Is the profile for City of Tucson government. As you can see, there's the CAP energy accounting for 3/4 with potable and reclaimed water at 16%, facilities and parks only at 7%, street and traffic lighting at 1%, and fleet less than 1% there. Here's the fleet breakdown, much like the county operations, most from on-road vehicles. Just 6% from the non-road construction type equipment. And that's a recap of the updated inventory. I'd be happy to take any questions this time.
If there are any questions for Dustin, please unmute yourself. Thank you, Dustin, for keeping us updated on the greenhouse emissions.
Sure thing. Thanks to everybody for their help contributing the data.
With that presentation, as well as in the meeting invitation, we had a report that supports the presentation. We'd like to now take, I'd like to recommend approval for the regional greenhouse inventory. Is there a motion to do that?
So moved. This is Chris.
Thank you, Christina. Is there a second to the motion?
This is Paula. I second the motion.
Thank you, Paula. Is there any discussion of the presentation or the report? I think that what we can do now is to take a vote so the committee members would unmute themselves, and we'll do another voice vote to pass the motion. All those in favor? All those?
Aye.
All those in favor say aye.
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 All those not in favor say nay. The recommendation to approve the regional greenhouse gas inventory for 2014 through 2019 is approved. Congratulations, Dustin. Thank you very much. Our next presentation is Pima County Sustainable Action Plan update, and we have 3 presenters. Julie Robinson is the environmental scientist and manager of the sustainability program for Pima County Office of Sustainability and Conservation. Sandra Maina is a climate scientist and program coordinator for the same program. And Marie Light, as a stormwater manager, will be adding some information to the sustainability action plan as well. Julie, would you like to proceed?
Yes, thank you. And I believe Sandra is controlling our slides. And they're coming up. Great. So thank you, everyone, and Lee, for having us. We're going to just give you a quick overview background piece for the Sustainable Action Plan, in case you're not familiar with the new plan. And then we'll dive into some key pieces related to our our annual report that we'll be releasing in a few weeks, and focusing on our greenhouse gas emission calculations and our work around climate mitigation. So going back in time, in 2017, 2018, the Board of Supervisors recommended that when we update the Sustainable Action Plan, which has been a living policy document since 2007, the board recommended that we realign the plan with the Paris Agreement, and we really put a strong focus on our climate mitigation and adaptation pieces. And our plan, what is important to realize is our plan is internally focused. It's looking at county operations and facilities. We don't have an external piece of this per se, although we are somewhat linked and aligned with Pima Prospers, which is the county's overall land management plan. Okay, so we updated the plan. We involved all the departments and personnel. We brought all the expertise to the table, and then we oriented the plan around 5 core chapters. Next slide. Okay, and the 5 core chapters are focused on looking at how all aspects of operations contribute either to carbon emissions and or some sort of adaptation feature. So we track our carbon emissions, and Sandra's going to go into that a little bit more in detail. We track our water consumption. We track the amount of water as well that we apply towards aquifer recharge or beneficial reuse. We continue to track the inputs from the Sonoran Desert Conservation Plan, a very important land management plan going back 20 years. So we track the amount of acres and the amount of restoration actions that are happening on our open space lands, historic conservation efforts as well, and the management of cultural resources. We look at materials, so we track the amount of volume of waste that goes into the landfill, and the reduction of that is a measure of the amount of recycling that we're able to do. And we also encourage and track the use of preferred products or green products in county purchasing and procurement operations. And a new area that we're working towards expanding and building is looking at how we can use education and outreach to our own workforce to improve climate preparedness, both as our workforce is out in the field, but also with information they can take home and make their households more prepared to deal with climate extremes. Next slide. So Sandra is going to go in and talk to you specifically now about our greenhouse gas emissions.
Thanks, Julie. So at the beginning of this updated SAFGO journey, what we first set out to do was kind of project what our emissions would be if we just continued business as usual, not having adjusted any of our emissions to any kind of changes in our in the way that we go about doing things, but taking into account the efforts that the utility company were doing to incorporate renewable energy sources. So in the chart, you'll see there's 3 main lines. There's the orange dashed line, and those are the projected emissions. It was just assuming a 2% growth under these business as usual conditions, starting out with our baseline year emissions. And so while Dustin's analysis was using the calendar year, we do ours at a fiscal year. So our baseline was fiscal year ending in 2019. And so going about that 2% growth, by the end of fiscal year 2026, following the orange line, you'll see that we will end up decreasing our emissions slightly, but it's still not close to that Paris Agreement commitment that we have set up to. And the Paris Agreement commitment is reducing our emissions by 26 to 28% below our internally operations, our emissions in 2005. And we actually had, prior to knowing that our Paris Agreement NDC, the National Determined Contribution, was going to actually reduce even further, we had set up to have a more aspirational goal to cut our emissions by 50% compared to our 2005 levels. So at that last year marker, you'll see those two goals. And so with business as usual, our emissions are not going to reach either one of those targets. So we do have work to do. So taking a look at our emissions for this reporting year, fiscal year ending in 2020, we will be publishing these results soon. In that, the blue solid line shows us what our emissions are. And so the emissions that are incorporated into this are just the carbon related emissions relating to our electricity use, natural gas use, as well as the energy used by wastewater. And so that pie graph in the upper right corner, I know the font is a little small, but that shows one of our emissions breakout for this fiscal year ending in 2020, where our buildings and facility operations and wastewater operations take up the majority of our energy use. And then wastewater treatment comes in next, and then our fleet emissions, and then followed by our solid waste emissions. So then above that is this gray dotted line. And so that's just to show us what our emissions would have been if we didn't rely on, not necessarily didn't rely, but if TEP didn't pursue renewable energy sources and we didn't incorporate that into our emissions calculations, our emissions would actually be increasing instead of decreasing. So it's to say that right now, utilities contribution to is helping us greatly to decrease our emissions, but we need to do a lot more if we're to reach the Paris Agreement target, let alone our aspirational goal, the Pima County target. And so in order to do that, we have set up an implementation plan that I'll have Julie speak a little bit more about.
Great. Thank you, Sandra. So I'm so grateful that we have Sandra here. She's a great analyst, and she can take all this information and crunch it and help us really have a clearer picture of the sector breakout. So, you know, the term that energy managers are so fond of is that, you know, we can't manage what we can't measure. So it's really important for us to understand what the landscape of emissions look like at the county. But then we have to turn our attention to trying to reduce our emissions. And this is a cross-departmental, cross-sector effort, right? So we have proposed this plan where we, every year, Sandra and I take a look at all the strategies in SAPCO, that's the acronym for the Sustainable Action Plan for County Operations. And we do a scoring and ranking using a multi-criteria decision analysis tool. And this is something that's been out there with Lean Innovation for Sustainability, and we sort of adopted it for our own use. So we do score and rank strategies every year, and we present that to county leadership so that they have an idea from our perspective what are the most important things we should be doing to be meeting the goals and targets of SAPCO. And then we ask our deputy county administrators to select those strategies with the input from directors, and then develop work plans. And we are planning to compile these work plans and then ask directors to assign the strategies to task forces to manage. part of this process, and many of you know who are working within government, a key piece of this is funding, right? Where does the funding come from? And a lot of these strategies now are outside the wheelhouse of one department. And so we're sort of stepping into a new space of how we look at managing operations, not just for keeping the wheels running and the lights on, but doing bigger and bolder efforts. And those require different sets of expertise at the table. So this framework is really an attempt to look at how we can bring the expertise to the table, identify core areas for work, seek internally the funding to do those pieces of the work, and then a process for basically marching through those plans through the year. And so fast forwarding to step 11, we take every year, we collect the data from the different departments about how we're doing. We rely really heavily on our energy manager and folks in fleet, and we coordinate with them carefully, and then we produce the plan. And that shows us how well we're doing or where we need to do better. So next, we're going to ask Marie to talk about some of the adaptation targets. Maria was really heavily involved early on in helping us look at green infrastructure. That was a new piece of this plan, and why that is so important. So many times we think about the Paris Agreement as just being mitigation, right? Just cutting our carbon emission. But there's another piece of the Paris Agreement that says, you know, things are going to get our climate is changing, our planet is changing, and how do we prepare for that, and how do we become more resilient for that, and how do we do that in a way that also considers the needs of everyone, especially the most vulnerable populations and people. So while we're internally focused, we recognize that our operations can play a role in helping build resilience. So I'll let Marie talk about the adaptation pieces now.
Thank you, Julie. Well, it was my pleasure to be working with you and all the people who were providing input on this project. There are multiple benefits for putting in green infrastructure, and certainly there's so much more to be accomplished. So we were identifying what can we do on Pima County properties, including the right-of-ways. And there are a number of locations that were identified. And so we identified 43 locations, and now we're looking at translating that into acres. That's more specific. We initially were putting in 10,000 trees that we wanted to plant, and we've already put in, we've already met a third of our goal by our goal of completing all this by 2025. And so I know that we're going to be wanting to add more trees than 10,000. And certainly for, in Julie's last slide that she showed, one of the things that's really clear is that just recently we've seen that 3.9 degrees increase in temperature, and the shade from the trees are really important because they can lower temperatures by 10 degrees to 34 degrees Fahrenheit. And so that's really important to have these additions, particularly in areas that have low tree canopy and high temperatures. And so one of the things that we did to demonstrate how important this is was to come up with 2 projects. And what you're seeing here is one of our projects that's on the Santa Cruz River, just north of Grant, called Meander Bend Park. It was an abandoned sand and gravel pit, and now we've been doing a conversion into a park. We used the AutoCase analysis to identify what are all the costs and benefits for the project. And so it was really great to look at, most everyone looks at what the financial cost of these projects are. And so you can see that there is a pretty good chunk of money that is invested to buy the land and do all the installations as well as do any maintenance there. And what is not counted is those benefits that are social and environmental. And we were very pleased to have a significant triple bottom line of $9 million benefit. One of the key things, if you could go back for a second, one of the key things is that there is just to the northwest of this park, there's a neighborhood there, and the property values go up for any residential areas that are within walking distance of a park. And those are benefits that makes their property values go up as well as putting in more recreational areas.
So thank you, Marie. So Marie's in the process now of working with departments across the county, including DOT and flood control, of course, to put together a system so we can track all the projects that are happening, and we can provide an accurate count year to year. We're fortunate because she wears many hats, and she's willing to take this piece on as well. So thanks for that. I know we're short on time here, so this last piece I just wanted to bring to your attention because it's also new to the plan. In the landscape chapter, we identified a new section for food systems, and this was really to look at the history of the county. Its involvement in food systems has been going back decades, although we've never thought about it that way. So the conservation of ranches and the grazing leases is a food system effort. The work the health department is doing with nutrition and prenatal health and health for mothers is food system work. And we also lease land, or flood control and the county parks lease land to foundations that do some food system production. So Las Milpitas is a farm run by the community food bank. It's on flood control land. And we wanted to understand the benefits of this type of work, if there are benefits, right, and how we might do this in an environmentally responsible way. Next slide. I think we have one more that shows the benefits. Yeah, so for this project, we looked at using actual data from the farm, working closely with the farm staff, capturing their electricity, water usage, their production values, and to see if there was a real benefit through expanding this type of food system work. And in fact, we did find over 40 years, we used a mix of potable and reclaimed or harvested rainwater. There was benefit, even under 100% potable water scenario, anywhere from a little under $1 million to $1.5 million over 40 years. A big part of the benefit with this was also the education type of programming the farm does. So I know we need to wrap up, but I wanted to let you know this report is on our website, and I just wanted to thank my team for presenting today, and we can take any questions you have.
We do have plenty of time for any questions. So please unmute yourself and feel free to ask questions. Natalie, we are not hearing you. You are unmuted, I can see. Oh, sorry that we're not
Try
able.
calling in Natalie, separate.
Oh, that's a good idea. Or if you would like to email me, I can help out.
Maria, could I ask a question?
Yes, please.
So this is excellent, the way the county is evolving their sustainable action plan for the county offices and county managed buildings and county personnel. But this does not in any way address extreme heat events and community cooling centers and things of that nature. And it's very disturbing when you see cities like Phoenix, which have such excellent programs that all branches of government are involved in. And I'm just curious, I realize that sometimes there's not the will in terms of the leadership to branch out and do these things. What does the team foresee for the immediate future, barring citizens being more active in insisting that their needs be addressed as well?
I can take that one a little bit, and then Marie, maybe let you jump in. I have a, so thanks, Chris. So extreme heat events is something that I personally care a lot about. Going back before I even started at the county, I was doing some volunteer work with Physicians for Social Responsibility on these issues. And recently, the health department has reached out to us to partner on some grant funding for cooling centers and mapping these. And we've been in contact with our colleagues over at the city. So we're looking at how we might build sort of a collaborative team and share this resource. But there is a tremendous amount of work to do here, and there's a tremendous amount of risk by not moving quickly to get to work on these issues. We never know, right, when the blackout is going to happen and when we're going to lose power. And we also know that people in our community, most vulnerable people in our community, are low income and communities of color. And so something that we can do at the county is working through the health department on these issues. And then Marie might have some more to share.
Yes, Christina, we all are looking at this as a very serious issue. And just as COVID was starting up was when we were having the conversations with the health department, and all of that was put aside because there was this significant pending health issue. And so they've been focusing on that. And meanwhile, the rest of us have been working on putting together information. Mead, perhaps you'd like to talk about your collaboration that you've been doing with the University of Arizona and the heat map that you have on your green infrastructure prioritization map.
Sure. First, I want to say thanks for the presentation as well. And what Marie is speaking about is we have new heat data that Lad Keith helped to create at the U of A. So there's now more of a time series of data for heat available, and that is continuing to develop. So if you go to the Green Infrastructure Prioritization tool on the PAG site, you can see what's available so far. And we're looking to have some meetings. If you're interested, let me know. And we're going to be presenting this data and getting feedback as it's being developed. And we might enhance the tool to be more of a climate resiliency tool, since it's really grown a lot in purpose over time. Another area that may be updated is to connect with the cooling centers. The partners that have created that data layer might benefit from a long-term host for that data, because it takes a bit to maintain a site like that. So that's how we're plugging in so far.
Thank you, Julie and Marie and Mead. If I thought that the three of you were running things, I would just be all comfy and cozy and not have a problem with this at all. But I have been, as many of you may or may not know, a little bit vocal about this issue for a while now, as a retired registered nurse specializing in critical and emergency care. And it's really important, and time is a wasting. So I'm very happy to hear the three of you. I'm very happy to hear there's some coordination going on with the city and through PAG. And of course, I have nothing but respect and praise for your work. Thank you so very much. I just hope we can kick some other people's little behinds into gear here. And I'll just leave it at that.
We welcome support.
Yes, we do. Thank you so much. And I would like to keep on track with our agenda. And I would like to have now, we're going to talk about the City of Tucson's Climate Action Plan. And Fatima Luna is going to be presenting, making the presentation, and she's the Climate and Sustainability Policy Advisor for Mayor Regina Romero for the City of Tucson. And she leads and manages the development and implementation of the Climate Action Plan.
Thank you, Mary. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Thanks for the opportunity to share some of the work that the mayor has been doing collectively with city departments and also with external partners. So the mayor's climate action and sustainability goals come directly from the climate emergency declaration that was adopted by mayor and council last year. And it establishes the overarching goal of becoming a net zero city government by 2030 by mainly phasing out of fossil fuels and transitioning into renewable and clean energy. So as one of the biggest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions, transportation is an important strategy to advance carbon neutrality. For that reason, and also in anticipation of President Biden's American Jobs Plan, Mayor Romero and Councilmember Ulick developed a working draft for an EV readiness roadmap that was essentially adopted in April by Mayor and Council. And the EV readiness roadmap supports a vision for the city of Tucson to become a leader in clean, convenient, and affordable transportation that is accessible to historically underserved communities, and that is also powered by locally sourced clean and renewable energy. So in essence, the EV roadmap charts a holistic approach for the city of Tucson to advance an equitable EV transportation system that is based on clean energy. It includes key areas of work with related actions that will guide the city and also our partners to support EV conversion. So each of these actions has a different timeline given, a different timeline, and that is because every aspect of the roadmap is progressive, and there are actions that are within the immediate term, within 3 to 6 months, short term, medium term, and then the long term. And they build off each other. So since the EV roadmap or the working draft was adopted, we have been meeting with key city departments to obtain their feedback, and we will continue to socialize that roadmap with departments and also with some of the key potential partners that we're identifying in the roadmap to finalize the document and also work on its implementation. And parallel to that, we are targeting some of the immediate actions that were identified. We do have a working website, and we're also gathering some of the information to begin doing that demand analysis. So we have been making progress. And additionally, working with the Environmental and General Service Department, we are strategizing on ways to become a zero waste city by 2050. Our goal is to divert 50% of waste by 2030. In April, the city, working with Compost Cats from the U of A, inaugurated the compost facility at the landfill. We're also piloting the glass reuse program, and we're exploring the use of biofusion blocks, which is a system that creates eco-friendly building blocks from waste. We're also using nature-based solutions to combat the heat island effect, and this is through the mayor's Tucson Million Trees initiative. And to ensure that we install green infrastructure, including trees and rainwater harvesting basins in the areas that are most in need, we replicated the American Forest methodology with Tucson data to create a tree equity score in collaboration with the U of A. And this tree equity score is a way to measure how well our community is doing to ensure that the benefits of urban tree canopy are reaching low-income communities of color that are most susceptible to extreme heat. So the score evaluates the need and the priority for trees. In terms of the needs, it's based on the existing tree canopy, population density, and the priority uses community characteristics such as like income, employment, race, age, and surface temperature. So that's a pretty cool tool that I can share with you all after the presentation. We're also exploring options to generate energy and increase efficiency in city facilities. I won't go into detail because I know we have limited time. And lastly, we are in the process of collecting input for the City of Tucson's Climate Action Plan. We just closed our community survey, which had over 3,900 responses. We are working with the University Climate Change Coalition to implement a series of community listening sessions with targeted groups. And this effort is particularly exciting because it is community driven. Community members were trained by Southwest Decision Resources to become facilitators so they can essentially implement the listening sessions. And the workshop itself was developed by community members. We already had 6 listening sessions with different groups, and we expect to have several more through June. And we will have a final report by the end of July. So these are some of the things that the mayor's office has been working on and also with like city departments and other partners in terms of moving forward with climate action and sustainability. And I'll stop there and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Fatima. If you have a question, please go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hey, this is Roxanne. I'm with the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality.
Roxanne, can you speak up a little bit more?
Yep, I can. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you. So I was just wondering, I love how your plan sounds and that you have that tool to prioritize. When you look at the canopy of the trees and you're looking to put in new trees, are you looking at, and I'm sorry if you said this and I missed it, more native, low VOC, all that jazz?
Yes.
And the reason I ask is because we've had people ask us for tree input, and Maricopa County has it, and they helped identify the low VOC ones. So
yes, that is a great question. Thank you, Roxanne. So yes, right now we are actually in the process of developing our tree palette, and we are taking input from different groups that are already doing this kind of work. I was also like doing research and all of that. But of course, we can't wait to have all the pieces in place to begin planting trees. So we have our main underground partners are Trees for Tucson, and we are focusing on native trees, desert adapted trees that provide shade. So yes, that is a priority, and it will continue to be. We also actually tour, not myself particularly, but our team, our urban forestry program manager, tour the Pima County nursery, and we learned quite a bit from you all. It was, just the concept of growing trees with tough love, basically trees that are desert adapted. It's a great strategy. The less water they can use, the better, and the more resilient to heat, the better. So we're definitely focusing on those kinds of trees.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
I have one if there's not any others. Thank you, Fatima, for your leadership on this issue. And I just wanted to take the opportunity, since the county's presenting as well today, to ask if you could share with the committee of any coordination that might be happening on those tree goals, since the county properties in many cases are within the city. Have you been discussing this? And I'm especially picturing it along the loop, where we'd be meeting some like watershed restoration goals as well by enhancing that nice walkway with shade.
Yes, thank you. That is a good question. And yes, our urban forestry program manager has been meeting with a lot of partners, community partners, and actually the loop was one of the concepts that we had for high density tree planting. I know that the city doesn't have enough land to plant 1 million trees. So like having places in, private properties, also like public spaces where we can do high densities, definitely, being considered. And in terms of the coordination, I'm sure there has been. I just have to check with the urban forestry program manager because she's been leading that effort. But yes, like if I'm sure it has happened, but if it hasn't, that's definitely something that will need to happen because, we don't want to replicate efforts, and we definitely want to maximize resources and coordination. There's a ton of community groups already that are doing great work. So those partnerships are important. And the first year was a lot about that, like about reaching out to the different community groups. What are they doing? How can we align efforts? Also increasing the capacity for, just the initiative in general, creating the tool. We are finding or heavily focusing on fundraising as well, like private dollars. So that's a big issue. Like you can have an amazing plan, but you need to have the funding to implement it. So we're doing a lot of that. So yes, I'm sure there has been some I guess initial contact, but more of that coordination for the implementation is to come. Now that we have more of the infrastructure in place to make that happen.
Thank you, Fatima. I do have another question too. I noticed that you have the carbon neutrality by 2030. So it looks like there's still going to be greenhouse gas emissions, but the 1 million tree planting is going to be uptaking that carbon. Can you talk a little bit more about how planting the trees helps achieve the carbon neutrality?
Yeah, so basically everything is going to help the carbon neutrality goal, not only like, reducing our emissions, but also like the carbon sequestration from trees. We do work with our partners at American Forest. We are part of the 1T.org initiative, which is a global initiative that has a goal of planting 1 trillion trees by 2030. And part of that initiative, we pledge the mayor to 1 million trees as part of that larger initiative. So the greenhouse gas or the sequestration is estimated through that. They have a tool working with American Forest and other scientists to track that. And yeah, that essentially be counted for the carbon neutrality goal. But that's just one piece of the puzzle. There's a lot other things that we need to do, actions that we need to do to make sure that we reach that carbon neutrality goal by 2030.
Thank you. Thank you.
Can I jump in for a minute back to Mead's question? Marie, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in part of the work on the Green Infrastructure Action Plan that you led identified that there was a lot of opportunity along the loop on the southwest, south, and southeast side in particular, and that maybe that is a space that we could ask for PAG's help and through the watershed group that you manage to look at, or maybe through the low impact development group, look at a couple of those sites where we might be able to build some partnership. As Fatima said, leverage leverage all our resources. So I think there's a lot of work that we could do in that area, and I really appreciate the question, Mead, and I think that we need we could use some help in convening the space to then move some of that work forward.
Yes, I do want to add to that in that the loop was one of the prime locations to make sure that as people were getting their exercise, that they were going to be in a cool environment. And what our goal was to be able to plant trees in a way that we weren't creating an additional demand for water. And the way the loop was, the lay of the land puts in the south and southwest, the loop is a high point. And so it's not a place where water is running towards the trees. So that was one of the limitations. And to be honest with you, we're in the early stages of figuring out how do we make sure that we can create that wonderful watershed so that it is focused to vegetation that can create shade. And so I'm sure as time goes along that we'll have more design details that provide that information for the architects and engineers who are building projects.
This is not a surprise to anyone on this call, but really, time is of the essence on these things as well, right? Because it takes 6 years to get tree canopy enough to provide shade. And so the sooner we can be getting these trees in the ground in a sustainable way, the better off we're going to be. So a lot of it comes down to funding, right? How do we find the funding to do this and get the political will and the community support to do it as well? So I would say that all help, support is welcome in this area, and finding these spaces that we can leverage our resources together would be fantastic.
Yeah, I agree.
Also, I just want to say real quick too that on the transportation website, there is a link that shows all the drought tolerant trees and the plant list that are what are considered drought tolerant. And then also, I'm sure on Tucson Clean and Beautiful's website, they probably have it as well. And they offer their discounted tree rates and such. In the GSI structures with the additional tax on the water bills, that's still moving forward. There's a lot of planning that we're doing with that at this time. They're in the process of hiring another project manager that's going to kind of oversee some of the maintenance aspects of it and some of the day-to-day operations on it. So stay tuned with that. And then also, as Fatima said, that our urban forester, she's also working on a tree committee that's going to be overseeing maintenance policies and such. So
that's so great to hear about the urban forestry position and support services happening at the city. I think Marie could probably has. She's been advocating for something similar at the county for years too. So there's an opportunity for how to leverage our resources.
Yeah, it'll be nice to get everything in kind of one area to coordinate efforts and not have to look all over the internet or places to get information.
We're getting there. I do want to have the time for the next presentation. Thank you very much, Julie and Fatima, for your presentations, and Sandra for showing us all the things that we can do to have a sustainable environment to live in. The next presentation is the evolution of strategies to manage PFAS. And I'm going to make that presentation. I have had my first activities as a hydrologist was drilling wells out in the area where PFAS is currently being detected. And there are a lot of activities that we can do to begin addressing this issue. And so I wanted to go through a process of talking about what kinds of things have been done and what are currently being done now. So in previous presentations at EPAC, we've seen this triangle before, where there were these 6 compounds that were monitored under the unregulated contaminants that was required in 2013 through 2015. There have been a lot more compounds that have been identified since then. When we were first looking at this in 2019, the number was 5,000, and now we're in the 10,000 vicinity. So it is a growing issue for people. So in the 1930s was when these forever chemicals were first identified. They did have a good function in terms of providing this a slippery surface that could provide nonstick coatings and waterproofing fabrics, being stain resistant, and also being used for firefighting foams. Certainly they started being used in the 1980s with architectural resins. What they're talking about there is stain resistant carpets. And so it's been widely used throughout the world and in different kinds of products. And in the 1970s, they were finding that PFAS was in workers that were exposed. PFAS was in the blood of people who were working to manufacture these products. By the 1990s, we were seeing that there was blood it was being found in the blood of the general population. And additional analysis, additional analytic techniques were being developed. In the early 2000s, we were able to detect concentrations down to the nanograms per liter. What that is 1 drop of water in 20 Olympic pools. So it's a very, very small amount that's being detected. Once that technique was available, many of the universities and research organizations started doing tests in the environment, and they were finding it adjacent to where it was being used or manufactured, or in places where it had been used for firefighting. Then they started looking farther out and finding it was in a lot more areas than they thought. So as soon as people realized that it was in the environment and these were chemicals that were difficult to get rid of, they switched to developing alternatives or replacements that could have the same function but have different chemistry. And they found out within a very short period of time, nope, that is a problem. We need to just phase it out. And so there's been this uneven process of phasing out those compounds. Definitely we wanted to find EPA required sampling in 2013 through 2015 for those 6 PFAS compounds. And they found that 4% of the water supplies had detections of this compound. And think once that appeared, then there was a big effort then to stop using those chemicals. So it's just been in 2020 that all of the nations, Germany, China, Italy, and Germany have all agreed that it needs to be phased out as well. Now, the exposure pathways for PFAS, the primary one is ingestion. And we're looking at, there was a study that was done that showed that this was the case for PFOS, and we're extrapolating this then to all of the PFAS compounds. Primarily, it comes 72% through food ingestion, through packaging and cookware, and fish that are contaminated with PFAS. The second largest is 22% is water consumption, and last is 6% with dust ingestion. Now, most of the news that you hear about has to do with water consumption, and it's a big issue because once, you can decide not to eat fast food that's put in wrappers and containers that have PFAS. So there's something that a person can do, but if it's in water consumption, it's a different story because now you have, it's an essential for people's lives. So with the studies, they've been able to show that there is fairly widespread throughout the United States. And unfortunately, Arizona has got a number of watersheds that have PFAS in them. And it's nice to know where we have done analyses. There's a portion of Montana where we don't have any data. And it's important to know that there's a lot associated with the industrial sites, the military fire training areas, and a little bit with wastewater treatment. So what we did locally was, it was important to understand where PFAS might be occurring. And so Tucson Water did monitoring in 2013 through 2015 for the UCMR 3 in their distribution system. So they weren't finding it in their wells, or if they did, they shut the well off. They decided to do additional monitoring out in the airport area where there's a history of trichloroethylene chromium and 1,4-dioxane. And these wells that you see located on this map, these are all monitor wells. These are not production wells. Some of those are recovery wells that go into a treatment process that removes all the PFAS through granular activated carbon. So when this data came out in 2019, everyone was shocked to see these very high concentrations here, particularly in this area. And a team was formed to figure out what do we do with this. And there are a lot of databases that were assembled from the Arizona Department of Water Resources. They have a list of all wells that are drilled in the state. The Arizona Department of Health Services does health consultations for people who have wells that have contaminants in them. They also license the laboratories to make sure that they get accurate analytical results for PFAS, which, by the way, is very important because it's easy to contaminate the sample. The Pima County Health Department has also been delegated the authority for the public water systems, and the Department of Environmental Quality does the inspections for these public water systems. So what's key is, for public water systems, there are a lot of regulations, but for private wells, there are no regulations. So for a public water system where you have a maximum contaminant level or a screening level that would guide people about what to do, there is not that for private wells. there's also not a requirement for people to monitor in private wells. So the question was, here are all these people who have private wells out in this area. What could be going on there? It was a key for us because we could see that these concentrations were way above the health-based guidance level from EPA of 70. We were seeing that the highest concentrations are in the perched aquifer, which is good because that means the main production wells, which are in the regional, didn't have those high concentrations. We also could see that as we move in this direction, the concentrations got smaller. So it's moving north-northwest, just as the TCE plume was historically. We didn't know what the lateral extent in this area was, and we also didn't know what private wells were in this area. So all these data sets were assembled to figure out what wells are registered out there. Tucson Water has a database of private wells that are both registered and unregistered, which they have been doing an investigation on since the 1990s. Thanks to Chuck Foss. He has done a wonderful job going out and verifying, are these wells still there? Is there a pump in it? Are they hooked up to electricity? What is the state of these? And if he finds a well that's not on anybody's database, then he's also adding it to his database. Pima County also had a database for the monitoring that they were doing for Superfund site in that area. So so just to remind you, this was the area where they had the high concentrations, and we did not have information out in this area, and we didn't have information out in this area. So that was the target, was to look at all of these private wells and identify how many of them are exempt, which means they're less than 15 gallons per minute well, which means they don't have to report how much water they're pumping. And then they're also not required to do the monitoring. And so we found that there were 169 wells that were registered and 232 that were not registered, making a total of 401 wells that need to be reviewed site by site. So each well then was reviewed to see what was the use of that well. Had it been abandoned? If it was abandoned, then it was not operating, so there was not an exposure pathway. If it was being used for irrigation, then there was not an immediate issue for ingestion. And then also, was the property abandoned? So we did a review of the orthophoto. This is a photograph of a close-up looking at, this is a property that was once used, and now they're the remaining wells that are there. But notice that they were unregistered and they were verified in the field. And so in the database that was recorded, and we wanted to make sure what was going on there. And so we had a closer look at these. You can see the resolution. There is a square around this and some structures in there. So that's the kind of information that would indicate that there is a well out in that area. As compared to, these two are monitor wells. These wells were drilled back in the 90s for when the TCE was discovered in the groundwater contamination. And so you can see a square box, and there's no power that runs to these wells. You don't see any telephone poles or any electricity there. So that's an indication that someone goes out there with a generator and runs that while they pump the well to collect samples. So there's a lot of information that can be collected online using photographs and sharing data. The reason this was so important was that there are a lot of health issues that are associated with PFAS. Those early compounds that were developed were the long chain type. When they figured out we need to come up with replacements, they were short chain. And what we're finding is that they were both really not good. The short chain do not bioaccumulate in the same rate that the long chain does. But you can see with the longer chain, there's been this number has to do with the number of studies that have been identified, and then what the report identifies, whether it's a high risk, it's not conclusive, or if it's a low risk. And so we're early on in the process of trying to understand what the potential health impacts are. So with not having a clear idea, but knowing that there are issues out there, the next issue was to get out to people as quickly as possible. So it was September 11th when the agencies were exchanging the water quality data and the well inventories. By the 16th, PDEQ had put together a list of wells that were most likely operational, updated, and who could be likely exposed. ADEQ was the agency that was taking the lead to send notices to these 47 private well owners. The information was put in English and in Spanish. The request was, can we come out and sample your well at no cost to you, because we have an emerging contaminant in this area, and we would like to verify whether this is occurring in your well or not. And then there was a secondary offer to provide a safe source of water if the sampling showed it was positive. That first round was right in the heart of where all those high PFAS concentrations were. The second phase was looking to the east and the west to figure out where were the other potential wells being impacted, and they came up with another 44 wells, and that information was provided by November 11th. So within 61 days of knowing that there was an issue, basically 2 months, the people who were most likely being exposed had been notified and identified that there's an issue when we come out and sample your wells. We were surprised that not many people were responsive to that. About 10% responded. So ADEQ also contacted these people by phone and wanted to make sure that they were getting information. And then ADEQ sent the information to the well owners and then offered water waddle to those who had positive results, and provide that free of charge to them until they had a permanent source of safe water. Now, a lot of the activities that have been taking place recently have been huge, which is why I wanted to provide an update to you. I want to focus on what's been happening just recently. PFAS was, EPA identified that PFAS is a toxic chemical in June of 2020. So if there is an occurrence or a spill, now that has to be reported. This spring, we've had a number of activities. The UCMAR5, which is going to do monitoring in 2023 through 25. There are 29 PFAS compounds. We now have the analytical techniques available for those 29 compounds, so we can do the monitoring. Also, there's a proposal for effluent guidelines for wastewater treatment plants that would receive PFAS through their sanitary sewer system. EPA also formed the Council on PFAS, so there is a range of people to provide information. Usually takes 6 years from when they get a proposal to when they actually come up with an NCO. And I think there's a sense of urgency with activities that need to be done. So dialogues are now have ramped up. New Jersey as a state has decided that they want to move more quickly, and they have set their own standards for PFOA is at 14 nanograms per liter, PFAS is at 13. So that's nationally. And in Arizona, there's been a lot of activity, as noted. Tucson Water has been doing a lot of monitoring. Other water utilities were doing sampling, such as Marana and Oro Valley. And Tucson set their operational goals at 18 nanograms per liter. Since 2019, there have been ongoing studies to find out, are there other areas that have PFAS, and using a similar system where there's outreach to the homeowners. Also, there's a drilling program if there's a lack of information about where the edge of the contaminant is, and ADEQ is proceeding on that. Also, Governor Ducey sent a letter to the Department of Defense with 5 requests just asking for information about all the PFAS data that they have and coming up with conceptual site models for each facility and their estimate when it might reach a public drinking water system and begin with alacrity to start the remediation process. Just last week, the Department of Defense was identifying that they were projecting that was at least $2 billion to do cleanup within the United States, and it would likely increase from that point. And if you want to have any, there's a lot of information for PFAS on ADEQ's website. If you have recommendations, I would be glad to field them and take them and provide them to the team that is working on this. If you have any further questions too, our sense is we are all working on this together, and being able to collaborate with one another moves through any hurdles very quickly to make sure that people are safe. Any questions? If you want to unmute yourself and ask a question, please do.
Marie, this is Chris. It was my understanding that there was some research being done at the University of Arizona that might inform communities how better to deal with PFAS or bring about some methodology for local treatment. Are you aware of any of that?
Yes, very much so. And Bo Wang is the researcher who's doing that. There are some other folks who are looking at how fast do these compounds travel through the earth, and what kind of treatment systems are available. Right now, there are treatment systems. Granular activated carbon does remove the PFAS, but it's expensive because you have to constantly replace that carbon filter. So there is research being done on how to make it less expensive. And I also want to say to you too, Christina, that the university researchers have been meeting with the UCAB meeting. This is the Unified Citizens Advisory Board, who are looking at the TCE groundwater contamination. They are speaking with all the engineers and the contractors who are working on the cleanup in that area. So there is a good exchange of information that is happening between the University of Arizona researchers and people who have to do the remediation. And I should say too that the we've been also working with Paloma Boomer, who has also they're very much keyed into this process as well in terms of health risks and communicating to the public about the importance of these compounds. So there's been a lot of really good outreach with respect for PFAS.
That's good to hear. I lived in that area for a number of years and moved out in the late 80s and was in the TCE plume, as well as treating patients at Keno who were suffering from the cancers that evolved from that. And those neighborhoods have really undergone tremendous stressors and deserve full attention. So thank you, Marie.
They certainly do, which was why when we heard this, my sense was we need to get all those wells evaluated and get to them as fast as possible. And thank you for your questions. Are there any other questions? You're coming up on the end of the meeting, and I know that if there are any questions that or any topics that you would like to bring to the next meeting, please send that information to Kiki Lawson or Lee Comrie. And I also want to let you know, Sarah Reitmeyer is on vacation with her family, and she asked me to chair the meeting for this month, and Sarah will be back at our next meeting.
Maria, I have a quick question for your presentation.
Yes.
Or comment. I just wanted to thank you for both chairing and presenting today. I know that's a lot to handle, but the last meeting had a PFAS presentation by the water providers. And so this was a really great follow-up, really important to hear the proactive things the county and ADQ are doing for private well owners. And we keep track of a lot of these water quality concerns in our area-wide water quality management plan. So that's one reason we like to bring the presentations to the group, so that as we find out information and update our plan, we're informing the community and getting your feedback. So I'll work with you on a lot of these updates. It was exciting to hear the effluent guidelines coming out, for example. That's a big new step.
It is, and I really wanted to bring this to this group because you are going back to your organizations, and there's plenty of work to be done, and sharing resources is key to our being able to serve the public to make sure that we're maintaining their health.
I have a suggestion. You had asked for your task force. We hear a lot about the large projects that are treating PFAS or monitoring. And so that's probably the biggest, most important step. But I'm wondering about outreach for preventing more contributions of PFAS and ways people can reduce their exposure. And you had a nice slide there on, household products that contribute to our exposure. Do you know of any outreach that's occurring locally or at the state level for things people can do?
Yes, there are things that you can do on ADEQ's website. The PFAS-resources has a wonderful compendium of things that you can do. So there's a lot of information about the compounds, where it's found, and things that you can do to help yourself. I do feel questions from people who are well owners that they know they have PFAS, and what do they do? What things do they need to be careful for? So we are providing that information. But to your question of, are we actually doing an active outreach? We haven't got there yet. I think the COVID has really shut a lot of things down, and definitely I will take that back to the group as a request of providing more information actively.
Marie, this is Roxanne. I just want to also throw in the other thing we're doing is we're talking to the local emergency planning groups, so LEPCs, and talking to them about the AFFF firefighting foam, because that's a large contributor. There is the struggle is there isn't really a good replacement at the moment, but we're trying to work with that and trying to figure out how much is actually in the state. The other side of that is, how do you get rid of it safely? But we are trying to make sure that they're aware and if possible, change to a replacement that is the shorter chain for now, an acceptable firefighting replacement. So we're also doing it at the more industry level, as well as what we have we're still developing our website as well. So if you have other insight, you can let Marie know, you can let me know, and we'll see what we can get put up on there.
Thank you, Roxanne.
You're welcome.
Yeah, it's been a real privilege working with everybody to do a quick response. Are there any other questions or comments?
This is Lee Comrie. I just wanted to say thank you very much, Marie, for standing in. On behalf of Sarah, we certainly appreciate you taking time to take this on. Thank you.
You're welcome. And we are now a little bit over with our meeting. And is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
The EPAC meeting is formally adjourned at 11:06 a.m. Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
everyone.
Thank you, Marie.
Thanks all.
And